That day, it wasn't just raining. It felt like the whole sky was furious, pouring down on me every drop of icy pain. Just like the words my parents had hurled straight at my face. "You are a disgrace," my father roared, his face red as blood. My mother didn't bother yelling. She stood behind the door, her eyes cold like cooled steel, and said one line. "I don't have a daughter who chooses programming over business." The old canvas bag sagged under the rain. I gritted my teeth and zipped up my jacket, my heart numb, but for the first time in my life, I felt relief. My name is Amanda, and this is the story of the day I got kicked out of my home, only to become someone my family never saw coming. I was 18, my hair still damp from high school graduation, and I was already standing in front of the iron gate of our mansion, soaked to the bone, shivering from the cold, aching from words that couldn't be taken back. But I didn't regret it. For 18 years of my life, I had always been the golden child in the script my parents wrote, the perfect heir to Caldwell Ventures, a company that specialized in traditional medical equipment founded by my grandfather in the 70s. They had mapped out my entire path: study business administration at Stanford, intern at the headquarters during summers, and in 3 years, join the board of directors. But I felt suffocated. I loved computers. Not the social media addiction my mom sneered at, but a deep obsession with every line of code, every logical system running silently behind the apps. I wanted to be a software engineer. I wanted to build tools that helped people work faster, live easier. I applied to Illinois Institute of Technology, not fancy but with the machine learning program I craved. I did it all myself, wrote the application, applied for a scholarship, and received my acceptance letter with trembling joy. But that joy was crushed the moment I placed the letter on the dinner table that night. My father, Mr. Charles Caldwell, didn't even get through the second line. "A programmer. Amanda, this isn't a game." Before I could respond, my mother cut in, her voice as cold as winter air. "If you're not going to Stanford, don't come back here, you're on your own." I stayed silent. I thought they were just angry. But 3 days later, when I came back from my coding prep class, my dad was blocking the doorway, holding a suitcase I hadn't even packed. "You chose this path, then walk it. You won't get a cent from me. No tuition, no home, no inheritance. Got it?" I gripped the handle of the bag, looked into the eyes I used to fear, and for the first time, didn't cry. "Fine. I'll go." They thought I would scream, beg, crawl back inside that night. But I didn't. I turned away. Each step out of that big gate, where a private driver used to wait for me every morning, felt like my chest might break. Now it was just me, the rain, and a road disappearing into the dark. I didn't know if my mom watched from the window, or if my dad noticed how my hands trembled while I jammed the key into the ignition of that beat-up car I borrowed from a classmate. But I knew one thing. They would never look at me as their daughter again. And somehow that felt like breathing. I left the fancy suburbs of Chicago with no destination beyond a cheap student apartment I found on Craigslist. I had nothing but an old laptop, a few soaked clothes, and a wild determination to prove them wrong. Not with words. With action. They said I'd fail, come crawling back in tears. They never understood me. And they'd never seen me fight for real. I slept on a couch, too short for my height, in a tiny studio apartment owned by Rachel, a classmate I met at a STEM camp in 11th grade. It was on the 3rd floor, no elevator, and reeked of mold on the wallpapered yellow walls. But it was more than shelter. It was my beginning. "You sure about this? Your parents really aren't coming back for you?" Rachel once asked, as I pulled out my beat-up laptop and started typing at midnight. I smiled without looking up. They didn't kick me out to take me back, and I'm not going back to beg. During the day, I worked the register at an electronics store near campus, always short-staffed with grumpy customers. It wasn't a dream job. I got yelled at for not knowing the newest cables, forced into unpaid overtime, watched like I might steal a whole shelf of headphones. But I endured it. At night, I changed into a different uniform, hopped on a rusty bike and delivered pizza for a local shop. Rain, snow, darkness. I rode through all of it, gripping my phone for directions, heart pounding at every major unlit intersection. And late nights? Those were mine. Rachel went to bed at 11 a.m. I opened my laptop and picked up where I left off. I studied from free courses on Coursera, Udemy, anywhere I could learn how to build backends, handle APIs, or design user interfaces that didn't scare people off. Sometimes my eyes burned from fatigue. Some nights, I fell asleep at the kitchen table, waking up at 5 a.m. with keyboard marks on my forehead. But I never stopped. I had no money, no connections, no backup from anyone. But I had something my parents never saw in me. 6 months later, on a January evening, I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The app I'd built, a tool for students to share and track their study habits, finally worked. It was still full of bugs, and the interface looked like it came straight out of 2002, but it ran. And I could use it to log study time, set reminders, and connect with friends. I posted it on a student forum, not expecting much. Just 3 days later, over 1,200 downloads. And an email. From Garrett Thomas, CTO, SparkForge. The message was brief. Hi Amanda. I tried your Study Sync app. The concept has real potential. We're looking for independent thinkers like you. Are you free to meet next week? I read that email at least 10 times, thinking it was a prank. But no. Garrett was real. SparkForge was real. A small tech startup, developing project management solutions for universities. On the day of the interview, I borrowed a dress shirt from Rachel, pinned my hair back, and told myself not to shake. SparkForge's office was inside a renovated warehouse on the city's west side. Not fancy, but full of energy. Garrett was younger than I expected. He wore a hoodie, held a cup of coffee, and asked me just one question. Can you show me how you handled user data without using external libraries? I pulled out my laptop and walked him through it in 10 minutes. Garrett nodded. Good. You start Monday. Junior project developer, part-time. Flexible hours. Pay's not great, but you'll learn a lot. I could hardly believe it. Not because of the money, but because I, a girl kicked out of her house, with no fancy degree, no real-world experience, was chosen by a tech company for my actual skills. And I wasn't going to waste that chance. 3 months later, I was promoted to full-time. 6 months after that, I became lead developer on a team building an AI-powered academic performance monitoring tool. I studied like crazy, DevOps, data security. I read technical reports instead of watching Netflix. Every day I arrived at the office a little earlier, stayed a little later. For the first time, I had enough money not to sleep on a sofa anymore. I rented a small room just for me, white walls, a window facing the street, and a real desk. And there, in those quiet nights, I started to think bigger. Not just writing code for someone else, but creating something of my own. A data management system for nonprofit organizations. The idea came after I helped a community group fix their grant tracking spreadsheet. So messy and outdated, it felt like it came from the Stone Age. I started sketching it out, line by line, every feature, every security protocol. I knew it wasn't a $1 million product, but it was mine. And I would turn it into something the world had to recognize, not because I was Charles Caldwell's daughter, but because I was Amanda. And I had started over from zero. I don't remember the exact moment the idea took shape, just that it hit like a jolt of electricity in the middle of the night, while I was debugging a messy chunk of code in SparkForge's system. A bad data point had thrown the whole dashboard off, and I had to rewrite the entire data filtering algorithm from scratch. And I thought, why isn't there a smarter tool to fix this automatically? That idea stuck with me for weeks, clung to me like the bitterness I carried the day I left home. And just like that feeling, I couldn't ignore it. 2 years after my first day at SparkForge, I submitted my resignation. Garrett looked at me like I'd just announced I was flying to the moon in a car. You've got a solid position, a great team, good pay, a growing future, Why walk away? I took a deep breath. Because I don't want to spend my whole life building someone else's product, I want to build mine, from the ground up. I started with a messy sketch, an AI-integrated business management toolkit that could automatically analyze data, forecast internal trends, detect operational bottlenecks, and suggest improvement strategies. I called it Aether IQ because I believed data, when handled right, could bring something close to intuition to a business. Rachel, my former roommate, now working as a finance manager at a small education nonprofit, was the first person to test the prototype. "Amanda, this thing is insane," she texted after the software suggested she cut printing costs and go fully digital. "It even knew I forget to pay my quarterly service bills, and it knew. It didn't guess." I knew I had hit the right niche. So, I dove into building. I slept 4 hours a night, spent every remaining minute coding, reading research, learning more about machine learning models. I hired a small team of freelancers, used my savings to invest in UI and security. No restaurants, no new clothes, no social media. The world out there was loud. But I had one goal. 9 months later, AetherIQ launched its beta version. 30 small and medium-sized businesses signed up for the trial. 23 of them came back and signed 3-month contracts. 7 companies posted reviews, and one of those landed in the hands of an angel investor. His name was Harvey Mitchell, founder of Quasar Capital. A bald man with glasses and a bluntness that could cut steel. But when he met me during the pitch, he asked just one question. "If I gave you $1 million, what's the first thing you'd do?" I didn't hesitate. Hire the best AI team in Chicago and set up a dedicated data testing center. I don't need a fancy office. I need computing power and brains. He laughed and signed. Finally, someone who understands what matters. 1 year later, AetherIQ officially rebranded as Neural Wave Systems, and I was the founder and CEO. We landed a contract with a national logistics chain, then a small bank in Ohio, then a pharmaceutical startup. Word spread fast. Venture capitalists called non-stop. I was in meetings with 3 to 5 potential partners every day, auditing infrastructure security, reviewing legal documents, and hiring more people. Within 18 months, my company was valued at $18 million. 3 months after that, the number jumped to $52 million. I didn't fly private. I still lived in a rented apartment, though now it was a brighter space, with a balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. I still wore hoodies, ate ramen, and brewed my own coffee. Every dollar, every single one went back into the product, into people, into the future. That's when I heard from Ethan, an old friend from SparkForge, who had left out of frustration with management and was looking for a new opportunity. I invited him to lunch. "I'm looking for someone clear-headed enough to run the machine I'm building, not a backup CEO." Ethan nodded in less than 5 minutes. "When do I start?" We rented a small office on the 27th floor of a tech building in downtown Chicago. It had windows overlooking the river, a decent coffee machine, and a whiteboard always covered in messy handwriting. On the first day, standing in front of the Neural Wave Systems logo on the glass door, I said nothing. Ethan nudged my shoulder, smiling. "You don't have to say anything, just keep doing the things that leave the world speechless." I smiled, but inside, I was shouting. "Mom, Dad, you thought I'd crumble. But I built an empire out of everything you threw away. Dreams, grit, and the pain of being rejected." I was in my office, a bright space with glass walls looking out over downtown Chicago, when Ethan walked in, holding his iPad with a look he couldn't hide. "Amanda, you need to see this." I glanced at the screen. It was a stock chart. A sharp line, plummeting. Caldwell Ventures. I paused for a second, like someone had said the name I'd long buried. Then I swiveled my chair and crossed my arms. "How much?" Ethan replied without missing a beat. "Almost 70% in 8 months. Internal rumors say they're running out of liquidity." Caldwell Ventures, the company my father always boasted about as a generational legacy, the foundation stronger than any passing technology. A company that made traditional medical equipment, surviving on outdated contracts and processes that hadn't changed since the last decade. While the world was stepping into the age of AI, they were still using Excel to log orders and sending faxes. I opened their public financial report. Every line felt like a knock on the door from collapse. Revenue was dropping consistently. Operating costs had doubled due to supply chain failures. Short-term debts remained unresolved. And worst of all, there wasn't a single investment in digital transformation. I looked at Ethan and asked coldly, "How much do they need to survive?" Ethan responded immediately. "Around $5 million. Enough to keep things running for a few more quarters, if they cut staff and digitize the basics." I nodded, a tight knot forming in my chest. Less than 3 hours later, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Charles Caldwell, Dad. I had never deleted his number. Not because I was waiting for a call, but because I wanted to remember. To keep the scar as a reminder that I had survived. I let it ring exactly 3 times, then picked up. "Hello?" His voice came through, raspy and tired. "Amanda, I need to talk to you." I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the screen that read, Q3 net loss $3.40 m. "I know." He paused for a few seconds, then asked hesitantly, You've been following the company?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to feel the silence. The void he left when he pushed me out of his life. "I know everything, Dad, including how you called me a disgrace for refusing to be your queen of traditional business." "So what now? The queen of tech is supposed to save your crumbling kingdom?" I didn't wait for his reply. "Send a formal invitation. We meet at the old headquarters, Thursday 9 a.m. I hung up. My heart wasn't racing, my hands didn't shake, but deep inside I knew this would be the most unforgettable return of my life. On Thursday morning, I stepped into the grand lobby of Caldwell Ventures. Nothing had changed. The same crooked wooden clock, the outdated reception desk with a brass nameplate, and employees in dull suits who looked completely drained of life. One of them recognized me, but no one dared say my name. I walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The board of directors meeting room. The doors opened, and there they were. My father, my mother, and Lucas. My brother, the one they chose to replace me in that long-ago succession plan. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. My father sat at the center of the table, looking at me with a face caught between shame and a last attempt to project authority. My mother, still elegant as ever, but her eyes no longer held that scornful gleam. I sat down without asking, without invitation. "Let's begin," I said, flipping open my iPad. The screen filled with reports. Lucas spoke first, his tone annoyed. "You think you're so smart? You let us fall apart just to come back and brag?" I glanced at him. "I didn't come back to brag. I came back because my father called. Because this company is dying. And I didn't kill it. You did. With your stubbornness and pride." My father placed a hand on the table, voice low. "We need 5 million. We need tech. We need you." I raised an eyebrow. "You need me? Oh, so now I'm your daughter again? 7 years ago you said I'd starve for wanting to code, but now that you need money, suddenly you remember, I still carry the Caldwell name." My mother cut in, her voice light. "Amanda, can we just put the past behind us? This is a time for unity." I laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but the kind you make after hearing a terrible joke. "I didn't come here for family. I came for business strategy. And I don't do charity." I placed the file folder on the table. Neuralwave will acquire Caldwell Ventures for $22 million, entirely, including the brand, facilities, client base, technology. If... And the room went silent. Lucas shot up from his chair. "You're insane. This is a family company. You want to take over everything?" I stood up, facing my father. "No, Lucas. I'm not taking over. I'm rebuilding. What you all threw away? Dreams, capability, the future. I picked it up, made it shine. And now I'm pulling this company's corpse out of the ashes. If, and only if, you agree to sign. I closed the iPad and said coldly, "The deadline is 11 p.m. tonight. After that I'm not coming back." The boardroom on the 15th floor of Caldwell Ventures still had its polished walnut floors, the 12-seat table still there like time had fallen asleep between the cracks, showing in every financial report. But this time, I wasn't the girl scolded for daring to abandon tradition. I didn't come back to beg. I came back with a contract. And the power to rewrite every rule. My father, Charles Caldwell, sat at the head of the table, hands resting on an old leather notebook. He looked noticeably older. Sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, and his back no longer straight like it was the day he kicked me out. My mother, Evelyn, wore lighter makeup than usual, like she too was trying to hide the exhaustion. Lucas, my brother, stood near the window, his back turned, shoulders tense. I sat down, opened the folder and spoke calmly. Neuralwave is offering $25 million for a full acquisition of Caldwell Ventures. This includes fixed assets, brand equity, client database, existing contracts, and outstanding debts. Lucas jumped up, slamming his hand on the table. "What? This is our legacy? Who do you think you are, throwing numbers like that?" I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steady. "I'm the only person in this room who's ever built a company from scratch and made it profitable. And Lucas, I'm also the one you once called a failed programmer in front of the board. Remember that?" Lucas went pale. My mother gently grabbed his wrist and pulled him back into his seat. No one argued anymore. I continued. "Dad will stay on as a transition advisor for 6 months, then receive a fixed retirement salary and full withdrawal from the company." 6 months? My father frowned. 6 months is enough for me and the team to restructure operations and digitize the entire system. If you want longer, I can't guarantee efficiency. This is a tech company now. It's no longer the pencil and ledger era. He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a small nod, saying nothing more. I turned to my mother. "With your social network, I'm willing to offer you a senior PR advisory role, client relations, executive partnerships. Or you can choose full retirement. It's your call." She looked down at the table, lips pressed together. She didn't object, and I knew, for her, that was a yes. Then I stopped at Lucas. I let a few seconds pass, drawing out the silence like each tick of the clock was pushing him closer to the edge. "Lucas, you'll be kept on. If you agree to start over." He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Entry-level data analyst. You'll report to my team lead. No special treatment, no privileges, no exemptions. Starting salary same as everyone else. Any promotion will be based on performance." He let out a twisted laugh. "You're trying to humiliate me." "No. I'm giving you a chance to prove you're more than this family's shadow. But if you think you're above that, the door's still open for you to walk out." My mother turned to my father and whispered, "Maybe this is the only way to save the company." He clenched his fists, silent for a long time. Then he spoke, voice hoarse. "What if we say no?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I'll withdraw the offer. And I'll make it public that I extended a chance to collaborate, but Caldwell Ventures refused to change. I don't need to destroy you. The market will do that for me. At your current losses, you might last another 2 months. 3, at best." Lucas sank into his chair, face pale. I stood up and closed the folder. "The deadline is 11 p.m. tonight. After that, this offer disappears." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, one more thing." I turned back, locking eyes with my father. "When you sign the contract, I want you to use the same pen you used to sign my tuition rejection letter 7 years ago, the one engraved with the Caldwell Ventures logo. I believe it's still in your old drawer." No one said a word, but the stunned look in his eyes said enough. He remembered. He knew exactly what I was referring to. I left the boardroom, stepped into the elevator, and as the doors slowly closed, I saw my father bow his head for the first time in my life. 11:43 p.m. The lights on the 15th floor of Caldwell Ventures were still on. The rest of the building was silent, with only the glow of streetlights casting soft golden streaks across the hardwood floor through the glass windows. I stood by the window, in the exact spot Lucas had stood that morning, watching the city drift into sleep. My heart wasn't racing, my hands weren't trembling, but deep inside I knew. An old chapter was about to end. The door behind me creaked open. My father walked in first. No sharp footsteps like the ones that used to announce his presence at the company. Just slow, heavy steps, as if each one carried the weight of the past. My mother followed, changed into different clothes, her face a little pale. Lucas came last, no longer arrogant, only a stiff, uneasy silence. I turned around, saying nothing. My father placed a small leather box on the table. I didn't need to look closely to know what was inside. That pen. The board has agreed, he said, voice low and raspy. We accept your offer. I nodded. There was no celebration, no applause, only silence, as if making room for something more important. He opened the box. Inside was the gold-plated pen engraved with the Caldwell Ventures logo. It was exactly as I remembered. Untarnished, undamaged, as if it had never caused a single wound. But I remembered. I remembered the day he signed that letter denying my tuition. Hands steady, eyes never once meeting mine. He reached for the pen, then paused. Before I sign, he looked at me. There's something I need to say. I crossed my arms, staying silent. He sat down, not as a CEO of a corporation, but as a man, facing the mistakes he had avoided for far too long. You're like your grandfather Harold, he began. Not just the stubbornness or the way you see opportunity in everything, but that look in your eyes. The one that every time I saw it, made me feel pushed out of my comfort zone. My mother looked up. She took his hand. He glanced at her for a second, then continued. When Harold founded Caldwell Ventures, people called him crazy. He invested in medical sterilizers when no one believed the tech was necessary. He sold half our home to buy new equipment. And I hated that. Hated waking up every day feeling like I was leaping blind into the unknown. He paused, eyes locking with mine. When you said you wanted to study engineering, then rejected the business plan, I wasn't just angry. I was afraid. I could hear the tremble in his voice, not because he was weak, but because, for the first time, he was facing himself. I chose Lucas, not because he was better, but because he was easier to control, safer. He wouldn't take risks, he'd keep everything the way I did. Lucas lowered his head. No rebuttal, no argument. My mother spoke, her voice no longer cold like it used to be. Amanda, I was wrong too. I used to believe you would fail, and I was afraid that day would come. But it never did. And now, I'm the one asking you to save what your father and I let slip away. I didn't say anything. I looked at all three of them. The people who once pushed me off a cliff, now sitting there, realizing they were the ones who'd dug the hole. My father picked up the pen, but before he signed, he looked at me, his eyes red. I'm sorry. Those 3 words hit like a shockwave. Through thousands of arguments, hundreds of scoldings, I had never heard those words from him. For not believing in you, for letting fear control how I was a father. He looked down at the contract, gripped the pen, and signed. Then he handed it to my mother. She signed, her hand trembling. Lucas looked at me. He pulled out his own pen, but I gave a small nod. Use the same one. You're still part of this family, aren't you? He took the pen and signed the final line. 11:59 p.m. I picked up the contract, placed it in my leather case and stood up. My father gently reached for my hand. Not gripping, not pulling. Just a touch. Like a real father reaching for the daughter he lost 7 years ago. Can you forgive us? I looked into his eyes, and I saw something I never had before. True remorse. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. Forgiveness isn't about letting people back in, it's about not carrying the anger anymore. I turned to leave. When I reached the door, I paused and spoke. Without looking back. 9 a.m. tomorrow, first board meeting under neural wave systems. Don't be late. Then I stepped into the elevator, feeling like I had just closed a rusted door in my heart. The next morning at exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the main boardroom of Caldwell Ventures, no, Neuralwave, Caldwell Division, the new name that had been updated in the system at 6 a.m. The room was no longer the place where I had been rejected, mocked, or dismissed. Now, it was a chessboard. And I was the one making the first move. Ethan sat to my right, laptop open, beginning the presentation on the 100-day restructuring strategy. My father sat to my left, in his new advisory role, no longer at the head of the table. Lucas and my mother each sat in a corner, silent, but no longer defensive. I looked around the room and lifted my head. This is the first time, in Caldwell's history, that those who used to run the company will have to start over. I paused, then continued. And that's a good thing, because we're not building on the old foundation, we're tearing down the outdated walls that once separated innovation from tradition, that once divided family over a distorted dream. No one objected, no one interrupted. I turned to Lucas. This week you'll sit with the data engineering team, learn how to analyze customer behavior using machine learning models, not to become an expert, but to understand what real work looks like in this world. Lucas nodded, for the first time in years, without defensiveness. I turned to my father. You have 6 months to help us with the transition, but if you use that time to criticize or resist, I'll terminate the contract early, legally. I need experience, not interference. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I understand, and I'll try to learn from you. The way I should have from the beginning. My mother, the one who once mocked me for chasing programming fantasies, now opened her notebook and asked, "Is the relationship with MedSure Medical Group still open? I can help set up a meeting with them next week. Their CEO is an old college friend." I nodded, no hesitation, no bitterness. Because this is the beginning. Not for them. For me. When I stepped out of that building again that afternoon, sunlight burst onto the street like it had been waiting behind a storm. The sky was impossibly blue. No clouds, no trace of the musty air of the past. I stood on the steps in front of the revolving glass doors, the same spot where, 7 years ago, I had been thrown out with nothing but a soaked bag and a dream that was laughed at. Back then, I had nothing. No name. No place to go. Today, I have everything. Not money, though I have that. Not power, though I have more than they ever did. But freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to fail, and the freedom to forgive. I didn't come back to destroy the ones who hurt me. I didn't throw my parents' words back at them with the same bitterness they used on me. I came back to prove that growing up isn't about defeating others, it's about overcoming yourself. Ethan pulled the car up to the curb, rolled down the window and smiled. Done, CEO? I opened the door, got in, sat down beside him, and turned to say, "No, this is just the beginning." The car pulled away from the street, merging into the rush of people. People who looked just like me years ago, but this time, I wasn't running from anyone. I was leading. That night, when I returned to my apartment, not someone else's, not a friend's couch, I sat by the window, opened my laptop, and looked at the glowing screen. A new email popped up. From Charles Caldwell. "Amanda, thank you. Today, I didn't see a child defying her father. I saw the woman I never had the courage to become." I didn't reply. Not yet. I let it sit there, like both a closing line and a semicolon to a relationship I once thought was over. I opened my notes app and typed the first line of my upcoming speech at the National Tech Conference. I didn't succeed because I wanted revenge. I succeeded because I no longer needed it. I paused for a moment, then smiled and kept typing. 7 years ago, I was Amanda Caldwell, the outcast, the daughter who didn't fit the mold, the girl labeled a failure in the cold Chicago rain. Today, I am Amanda Quinn, CEO of Neural Wave Systems, and the one who gets to decide whether the name Caldwell stays or disappears from the business world. I don't need to erase it, because I've already risen beyond it. And this is just the first chapter of a brand new era. Amanda's story is living proof that success doesn't come from revenge, it comes from resilience and the courage to walk your own path, even when the world shuts you out. Rejected by her family, she still rose, taught herself, stood on her own, and built a tech empire from nothing. When she returned, she didn't take revenge, she rebuilt. That's real strength, turning pain into power, turning the failure others placed on you into a foundation to rise. And forgiving not because they deserve peace, but because you do. What do you think of Amanda's journey? If it were you, would you forgive or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful true-to-life stories about family and life.